Oh, yeah, I'm plugged in, I think. Yeah, all right. How are you doing? Let me just reposition this a little. I've been making sure that the gimbal is working properly because yesterday we had a couple of technical issues. Hopefully today it should be fine. But yeah, good morning, everybody. Thanks so much for joining. And I hope that you're doing good. I'll quickly introduce myself and then I'll start the tour. So yeah, if you can hear me, can you please put a thumbs up or say something on the chat just so I know that it's all working fine? And if not, well, I guess we'll figure it out because I'll be talking and you guys will be like, what the hell is happening? But yeah, thank you so much for joining. Lovely to see some familiar faces here. So I hope you're all having a very nice day. And for those of you who don't know me, my name is Dr. Lilian Cespedes Gonzalez, but please just call me Lily. I am a historian and the main tour guide here at Travolution Tours. Now, what we do here in Travolution Tours is very much linked with the mission of Heygo. We're trying to make history and culture affordable and accessible for everybody. So the fact that anyone can join me here from all over the world is fantastic, and that's what we're here for. So for those of you who have done a tour with me previously, I've been running some just general tours of the walk through Southampton, just so you could all be introduced to the actual city. For those of you who don't know where Southampton is or what Southampton is, it is the largest city in the south of England, literally right in the center. And today what we're going to be doing is talking about the early modern history of the city, so you can understand how we actually became the city that we are now. So if you have any questions, put them on the chat. And without any more ado, I'm going to turn on the camera to start with our first building of today and the history of Southampton itself. Right. So this building that you'll see here, there you go, that is Tudor House. This is actually one of our most important monuments in the city. It's, well, one of the best preserved monuments in town overall. And it is super important for us because it shows the prosperity of the city throughout time. But this building has gone through some dark times as well. So this is what I'm going to talk to you guys about. So even though it's called Tudor House, and I'm sure you can see the tracery here, this building actually dates all the way back to the 12th century. The first building itself was around 1180. Oh, hold on. My gimbal is having a funny moment. That beep. I don't know why it's not liking me. Okay, I think it's find itself stable now, hopefully. Right, there we go. So yes, the history of this building started in 1180, but the building was actually redone in 1510. We know that because the tracery is all done with wood, and when we did the carbon dating of the wood as well as the dendrochronology, it actually came back that the wood used for this building had been all taken in 1490. So that's how far the wood on this building is. The vast majority of the wood is original. So yes, Bonnie is actually Tudor. It's not mock Tudor, but as I'm sure you guys probably realize, there are some renovations. This is one of the few buildings where the city council throws more money into its repairs. So they do get replaced every so often, but the vast majority of the wood is still original. Now, I'm gonna get close here to the side so you can see a little bit more of the wood in the flesh. But yes, the reason why it's mostly called Tudor House is because originally it was supposed to be a Tudor building. Now, let me get here closer. There you go. That's the original wood itself. It most likely did not come from ships, and that actually goes back to the story of why this building is important. Here we have another example. Sorry, the gimbal is shouting at me again. It's not really liking the balance of the microphone today. Give me 1 second, guys. I'm so sorry about this. Okay, finally. Right, sorry, it's just sometimes when I connect this microphone, it seems to unbalance the phone on one side and the machine goes a bit crazy. But it seems that it's a bit happier now. So the building was the first evidence that we have of recovery in the city after the Black Death. right? Some context in here. The city of Southampton had about 2,500 inhabitants in the Middle Ages. And when the Black Death hit us, the population went down to about 800. It was really, really brutal. So the fact that they even had money to make a whole new building with proper wood from the New Forest, it's remarkable because it shows that there was wealth back in the city. That wealth came mostly through the 1400s thanks to merchants. And that's actually the relationship between this building and the city of Southampton and the story of early modern Southampton. The sea provided for the city. We had trade here since the early medieval period, but particularly since the time of William the Conqueror, the trade of wool picks up in Southampton, and this building during the 15th and 16th century became actually the area where they stored a lot of wool merchants' produce, and where some shipwrights also did their work. In fact, the building right next to it used to be one of the warehouses. Now, this building is no longer anything related with the shipping or wool industry. It's a museum currently, so you can actually go inside. And in fact, they have a recreated Tudor garden, which is absolutely gorgeous in the spring and in the summer. But it's funny because despite this building being so important, having been a huge center for trade and for merchants to put their stock and whatnot, for a little while we were very, very close to lose it because, well, we don't exactly know what happened. Despite being the most important building in the city in the 19th century, it was completely in shambles. It was about to fall off, and it was up for demolition. But an anthropologist and philanthropist from the city, William Spranger, decided that he was going to do everything in his power to save the building. So he poured a lot of money, he poured lots of public funds, and as of 1912, the building became a museum. Now, it's gone through several renovations since then, and the exhibition that you can see inside today is not the same as what they originally had in the early 20th century. But that's why we've mostly been able to preserve this building, because someone thought it would make a great museum. Otherwise, this would be completely lost. So we're very, very lucky to have it in here, still in one piece. So there you go. The last time they did renovations in here was actually in 2010. They were supposed to do some more, but the pandemic hit, and therefore we kind of missed out on that opportunity. So it's been about 10 years since they've done some major repairs, but it's still in pretty good condition, as you can see. Right. Now that you have this background to the early modern history of the city, we're going to move towards the seafront because, like I said, today the importance of Southampton is mostly thanks to the port, to the harbor, and it has been that way since the 15th century. So we're going to be walking down to a very important monument that changed both the history of the United Kingdom and of the United States. Of course, I am talking of the Mayflower Memorial. For those of you who don't know, I'm going to show you in just a moment, so don't worry. I'll tell you all about it. But as we're walking down, you're also going to see some of the oldest still preserved buildings here in the city. Now, for those of you who may not have done my previous tours, we are actually in what used to be the heart of the city, right? Currently, it's not so much that. It's behind us, where the department store is. But yes, a lot of these paving stones have been here for a really long time. The streets here don't get changed much. Ooh, renovations in the house next door. This building that you see here is also one of the oldest in the city. It's the Duke of Wellington. It's a pub. As you can see, it's not as old as Tudor House, but very nearly. It's late 1500s. And over there, that is the street that connects us with the city walls. So as you can see, we're not very far at all from the original city defenses. Where we are going, in fact, is going to be the area that would have originally connected to the sea. But this all got bombed during the Second World War. So that's the reason why a lot of it is modern and we have very, very few buildings. But the few ones that we have, that's the reason why they're so well preserved, because as we lost so much heritage during the 20th century, it's very, very important that those few pieces that are still, all together, in the spot are actually kept. Now here on the left, we're going to reach another building that was very important for the city of Southampton in relation to Tudor House, which is called Wool House. It's currently a pub and a brewery. I'll show you with a bit more detail when we go past it. But an interesting fact about Wool House and Tudor House and the history of the port in general is that wool trade was so important in Southampton in the 16th century that we even have evidence for a guild of female wool packers. I bet you were not expecting to hear that. But yes, we have the actual records, the guild's fees, and everything else from these 12 women. It was just 12 of them. And their job was very simple. It wasn't anything very fancy. What they did was actually measure the length of the wool cargo, and they just covered it with canvas so that it would be protected when it went onto the ship or when it was being stored for a long period of time. But, for these 12 women to actually make a living from this, it must have meant that wool trade here in Southampton was vital. Otherwise, we wouldn't be able to have those records. Now, I'll show you this section in just a moment a bit better, because we're going to have to walk back this way. But that is the ferry that goes to the Isle of Wight. But we're going to see that a bit closer in just a moment. We're just going to take this one right to see the memorial for the Mayflower. Now, this is one of the busiest roads here in Southampton because it connects the city centre with the docks. And for those of you who may have not been on previous tours, Southampton is actually one of the busiest ports in the UK. It is been named the #1 cargo terminal in Europe as of 2012 and the busiest port in the United Kingdom as of 2016 and 2018. So that's the reason why there's always so much traffic in here. Right. We are now standing right in front of the Mayflower Memorial. You see this big pillar here? This would have been the exact spot, guys, from where the Mayflower ship departed in 1620. So what you need to realize is that the water was here. All of this, I don't know if you can see here on the other side, just past these buildings, that's where the water begins. We're going to see it closely in just a moment. But that's where the water is now. All of this is reclaimed land to the sea. So this would have been one of the major docks in the city during the 17th century. Now, the memorial was put here to commemorate, the founding of the colony itself. There were supposed to be celebrations in 2020 because that would have been, 400 years. More than 400 years, actually, 500 nearly, since the ship departed. But it all got, put on hold because of COVID. And they did some virtual celebrations, and thanks to that, if you guys are actually interested, the Archaeological Society, the Maritime Archaeological Society, did a 3D reproduction of the whole memorial itself, so you can see it online and play with it. But I'm gonna come up. There is a ramp. I'm gonna come up so you can see it from the front. But I just wanted to show you some of the plaques in here. Like this one, in memory of the Pilgrim Edward Doty in the Mayflower, passenger 16 September 1620. That's because, I'll tell you in just a moment, but a lot of these passengers actually died shortly after they reached their destination. So we do have not just memorial as of the fact that they departed from here, but unfortunately a lot of them died in transit. So I'll go upstairs and I'll show you the top of the memorial, because there is a little ship in there as well that is worthwhile seeing. It's not, they put this ramp here to make it accessible. It's not the easiest area to access if you don't really know where you're going. We have this very annoying tendency in Southampton to not necessarily signpost things very well. When was the memorial output? It was actually it was installed in 1920. So it would have been exactly 400 years after the ship departed from here. It must have been pretty scary setting off, yes, for sure. So as you can see, it's not anything major or fancy, but it is 50 foot tall. So it is quite a seizable, it's quite a seizable column in there. Now I'm trying to find an angle where the light will actually allow you to see the ship at the top, but although it's a beautiful day, the lighting is not really in our favor. But there we go. Can you see there on the top the little ship? It's supposed to signify the actual Mayflower, and the rest just the Portland stone once again that is commonly used here in Southampton. Portland stone actually comes from Dorset, which is not far from Southampton. In fact, it's the county alongside Hampshire on the west coast. But it's a very beautiful stone that is very easy to work with, and we have an abundance of it. So that's what we got, and that's actually the best the Zoom does. I don't know why it's not allowing me to go any farther today. I had problems with the Zoom yesterday as well on the gimbal, so I think one of the wires there is not working very well, unfortunately, Bonnie. I don't really know what's happening there. I've tried to fix it, but it's not going any farther than that, I'm afraid. I'm sorry about that. But yeah, so I don't know if you are guys familiar with the history of the Mayflower, but I'll tell you about it as we start walking down, and as we see it from a different angle, just so you can appreciate it all over. So during the 17th century in England, there was severe religious unrest. When I mean severe religious unrest, is the polite way of putting it. There had been religion wars for the vast majority of the 1500s and the 1600s all over in Europe. In England, it just kept on being a power balance between Catholics, Protestants, what have you not. And then finally, when the Protestants were in power, it became a matter of what branch of Protestantism was more important than the others. So we ended up with a lot of separatists and independent churches. Now, because Catholics came back into power during the 1600s, and then they came out of fashion again, there was a lot of religious persecution, essentially. So the Pilgrim Fathers, the vast majority of them were actually Puritans. After the reign of Oliver Cromwell, Puritanism wasn't particularly fashionable in England, right? So, it's what happens when you pretend to be the Lord Protector of the people and then you establish a tyranny. People may have an issue with your religious practices. It wasn't very well seen, so a lot of people wanted to break away from that, and they didn't want to promote the idea of Puritanism. So a lot of the Puritans decided that, not for political reasons so much, but for their own well-being and religious well-being, they were going to leave England. So there was a ship here called the Speedwell that was coming from Holland, from Leiden, to pick up pilgrims and to set off to the New World. Now, a lot of those pilgrims from Leiden were actually expats from the UK. They had already left the UK to go to Holland, but in Holland we also had the religion wars with the Spanish Empire. So it was just not a very good time for Puritanism anywhere in general. The opportunity comes up to go to the New World because here from Southampton there were very strong connections to the areas of Virginia. So there had already been a lot of shipping industry going that way and some other migrants going there to try their fortune. So they decide, you know what, we're going to put some ships together and cross the Atlantic. So the Speedwell joins the Mayflower here in Southampton. And they were supposed to be carrying half and half of the passengers. The issue is that the Speedwell had already encountered some problems in the channel. It nearly sank several times. It reaches Southampton, they do some repairs, the ship's still not floating well. So by the time the Speedwell and the Mayflower depart here in July, August, I say July, August because the calendar with the different religions actually changes here in the UK a couple of times. So it's not very easy for us to know whether it was July or August, but it was roughly mid-July, beginning of August. And they find themselves that after departure, they need to stop in Plymouth because the Speedwell nearly sank. This is the reason why the colony in Massachusetts is called the Plymouth colony, not the Southampton colony, even though it departed from here. So all of the passengers in the Speedwell get picked up by the Mayflower. Now, unfortunately, that meant that a ship that was already pretty full became over capacity. Okay, this ship, the Mayflower, was supposed to be carrying about 60 people altogether and the provisions for 60 people, and it ends up with 102. That is really dangerous when you're gonna get onto such a long voyage, okay? So, over capacity, the Mayflower departs once again, this time from Plymouth, across the Atlantic. Unfortunately, it catches a huge storm in between September-October time, which delays the trip 2 more months. By the time they reach the area of Massachusetts Bay in November 1620, it's not looking good. They had lots of losses from the point of view of provisions. Obviously, they reached Massachusetts in the dead of winter, which was not their original, choice, and that actually makes it really hard for the colonists to set their first communities. It's completely frozen wasteland. They don't know anything. They don't know the crops. They don't know the soils. They don't have resources to keep 102 people alive. Within 6 months of the ship getting to Massachusetts and founding the Plymouth colony, 50% of the people actually died, which is really sad because they went through all of this journey, all of this trouble, escaping religious persecution, to actually just die of starvation and freezing because the colony was just not successful to begin with. Eventually, after a whole year of trying really hard and receiving some help from the Native Americans, which we don't talk a lot about, the colony manages to have its first harvest, which is the reason why in the United States they celebrate Thanksgiving, because that was the first time they were actually able to feed their people. And that's the reason why the departure of the Mayflower is so important here in Southampton. It's a historic moment. We wish it would have been called the Southampton colony, but hey, you can't really, guess what's going to happen in the middle of the sea when you have two ships in precarious situations. Now, for those of you who don't know why the Plymouth colony was so important for both British and American history and generally the history of the world, is because this was the first colony that was created with a government without the need of a king. It was kind of like a communal government. It's a huge development for democracy, and in fact, the Plymouth colony becomes very much a precursor of a lot of the liberties and ideas of how to rule a country that would be developing in the United States after the American War of Independence against the United Kingdom. So that's the history of the Mayflower and why it's so important. And when we try to celebrate it here in England and in Southampton specifically, they are hoping to move the festivities that they had planned for 2020 probably this year or next year, because Southampton is currently campaigning for City of Culture 2025. But the campaign is not going so well, so they may just do some form of virtual commemoration again to try and sort of push forward some of those stories, which are really, really important and really valuable. But as you can see, it's wonderful that we had something like the Mayflower departing from here. It wouldn't have been without all of that trade that I mentioned, that ship would have ever left from Southampton. It would have been impossible to think. So it's once again the prosperity that the sea provides for this city that allowed this to happen. Now, I just want to stop here very quickly. This is the building that I was mentioning earlier, guys, called Tudor House. Now it's the Dancing Man Brewery. It's a very, very nice building. It's now a pub, but it used to be the wool storage house for the wool merchants here in Southampton. And it was also one of the tax collection offices. So as you can imagine, it was super, super important, because being so close to the sea, and I'll show you just a moment, the Watergate where all of those ships came through, it just meant that you could get all that tax, get all that money, bring it into the city, bring it into the ships, and be sorted. Now, we're just going to go up here because I think the view is very nice. And I know you guys like taking postcards as we go along. So I'm just going to show you the view here next to the Dancing Man Brewery. If you ever come down to Southampton, which I hope you do sometime, honestly stop here, even if it's just for a drink, because it's very nice. Right. So here you go. We've come from that side. That is Cuties. It's one of the oldest restaurants here in Southampton. It's been in the pier. It's very famous because it used to be an Indian brasserie. Now it's a Thai and Indian brasserie. But the food is absolutely delicious. And this is where the ferry for the Isle of Wight departs from. And over there are the docks and the red funnel entrance, actually. If you look a bit this way, you may see some ruins right there where my finger is pointing. The light is probably not doing us any favors, but there are some ruins there of an old house. It used to be believed to be a castle or a private residence from a very wealthy person, but it turns out that it was just another building of the city during medieval times. But yeah, so that's the view from here. We're gonna go down now to the next stop that links with the history of the port of Southampton, which is actually how Southampton became important and how we got our docks, which is what changes the city dramatically. Up until that moment in time, even with the trade that we were having through the 16th and 17th century, the city of Southampton didn't really recover much in terms of population. And it's hard as well for us to judge population in cities like Southampton during the Middle Ages and the early modern period, because being a port, a lot of the citizens were, they were mobile. They weren't living here 24/7. Okay, if they were working in the ships, which was the most common job that anyone could have here in Southampton, they were only here temporarily, right? They were in transit. So when we look at city records, population numbers, whatnot, it's very hard to know whether the numbers are on a high season or low season, whether those were formal residents, whether they were just people in passing. But either way, whichever way we look at it, even thinking of the numbers from a very, very sort of positive viewpoint, even the highest numbers suggest that Southampton was very much still in decline. Now, that building that you see over there used to be the city port authorities. Now it's pretty much derelict. We don't use it for anything. But we're gonna go over there to show you the dock area. And over here, we just have some nice buildings. All of these buildings that you see, again, they are actually from they are all mostly reconstructed after the war. They pretend to be old. They are actually not old at all. But I want you to show you quickly here on the left what remains of one of the city walls. Right here, you see here on the left, this building. So this is the water quay, the water gate and the water quay. This would have been where the actual wall ended. This would have been, again, the sea. So you see the wall and the sea would have started right there. And unfortunately, this is the most damaged piece of the wall, so it's not as nice as the one that we have in the city center. But as you can see, still very imposing and, still a very important monument. Unfortunately, this part, because it's so far away from where most people sort of do their shopping, doesn't receive as much funding to be preserved, so they mostly just clean it up. There is literally nothing on the other side, just empty wall. But, well, this is, like I said, this is part of the problem that we have in this city with our culture and our heritage, that is sort of, well, they can mix. The city wall was actually built, this version of the city wall, what you're seeing here, was actually built in the 1300s because of the conflict between England and France, the 100 Years' War, which was actually a lot more than 100 years. But the city of Southampton got raided by the French troops who were trying to gain access to the middle of Hampshire and farther into the country. So they realized that Southampton was the easiest way to get into Winchester. Winchester used to be the ancient capital of the kingdom, and it was still a very important city, even in the later Middle Ages. So they caught on to the fact that Southampton was the easiest way to get inside. So they raided, they caused quite a lot of damage, and the city decided, well, we can't have that. So they built these huge walls mostly in the 1330s, but it carried on until nearly the 1400s. And in fact, Tudor House, or the area where Tudor House is now, used to be part of the city walls. Or at least it was incorporated into the city walls. Right, I apologize, we're probably gonna hear some traffic now as we cross over. But yeah, that's when the city walls were built. And over here on the right, I don't know if you can see it, but well, that's the red funnel. That is indeed where people come to catch the ferry to the Isle of Wight. Now you can go to the Isle of Wight both from Southampton and from Portsmouth. Portsmouth has perhaps more regular ferries. It goes to two different locations, where here from Southampton we just go to one location in the Isle of Wight. And the reason why I want to talk to you guys about the importance of this connection is, well, just one peculiarity. First of all, the the ferry that goes to the Isle of Wight is like one of the most expensive ferries in the world, proportionally speaking, because it's not a very long journey. It's maybe 50 minutes, an hour, depending on how the weather is. In storm, I can guarantee you it's a lot longer. But it's so expensive in comparison to that journey anywhere else in the world. They could actually build a bridge to connect the two sides with the Isle of Wight, but they refused to because it's quite lucrative for them. So yeah, if you lived in the Isle of Wight, it's a very nice area. It's very peaceful over there, I think, and it has some lovely places. But like with the south of England, I don't think it often gets the same reputation as the rest of the country, unfortunately. I think now with the Isle of Wight Festival, which is like a big music and food festival, more people go over there. But there's a lot more that could be done in the Isle of Wight and the south of England overall. Yeah, oh my God, in like storms and fog in the south of England, in the island, it can be devastating, guys. Like even today, which is not a particularly windy day, we have wind here. I'm sure you can hear it. I'm doing everything I can to protect the microphone. So imagine in the middle of the storm, it's seriously brutal. Right, well, the reason why we're stopping here is because this little marina that you see here, and you see those big sort of long structures over there, that's some of the cruise ship terminals. And this is the reason why the city of Southampton is now cruise capital #1 of Europe and one of the most important ports in the world for cruise passengers and for ocean liners. All of that happens with this story that I've been telling you guys about the importance of trade here in Southampton. So with those humble origins as wool traders and as wine traders, we start connecting the dots. We start making friends in Iberia, which means Portugal and Spain. We also make some friends in Venice and in Florence. And trade starts developing slowly. Then obviously once the Plymouth colony opens over there, that allows for the international passage between one side of the Atlantic and the other, but still the development of the trading industry and of passenger industry here in Southampton and the south of England is very, very slow until this happens. And you'll be thinking, well, Lily, you're just pointing at the water, so what happened here? Well, this is currently water, but I'll show you around so you get a better idea of where we are at and why this matter. All of this area up until the 19th century was mudland, okay? This was just literally nothing. Those buildings where we've been just now were the edge of the water. And thankfully, by some miracle, the local authorities are granted in 1808 an act of parliament that allows them to build dry docks here. Now, why does that matter? Because with the building of those docks, eventually the city of Southampton was able to allow a lot more trade and ocean liners into our port. It wasn't just a small port with a couple of quays. It was an actual docking area. So we can build more ships, we can have more trade. But it's honestly that grant of Parliament at the beginning of the 19th century that makes that happen. And the docks were built here originally. This was the area. So this mudland is purchased by the Southampton City Dock Company for a total of £5,000. I know that probably doesn't sound very impressive for us now, but I can guarantee you guys that was a lot of money back right at the beginning of the 19th century. And thankfully, the inversion was really worthwhile, because after that, literally the population growth and the growth of this port goes up like exponentially. At that time, Southampton was reaching maybe about 10,000 permanent population right at the beginning of the 19th century. By the time the docks are completed, we are almost already at 100,000. Now, for a little bit of context, in this day and age, Southampton has a total population of about 350,000. If you only count Southampton, it's a strange combination, because here in the south of England we have a conurbation, which means two big cities or two big urban spaces colliding into each other, which is Southampton and Portsmouth. So technically speaking, Southampton and Portsmouth have a conurbation together, and with that conurbation we reach about 500,000, so like about 500,000 people. But just Southampton on its own is 350,000, which is still a lot of people, particularly for the south of England, where the rest of the area is rather rural. Well, just so you can understand the impact and how these docks carry on going. The docks become so important, but they are not very well managed. They're eventually bought by the Southwestern Rail Company. And now, for those of you who are from the UK, you probably know them because they own the trains here in the southwest. And you'll be thinking, why would the Southwestern Rail Company want to buy the docks in Southampton? Well, you see, what allowed them to purchase the docks is that over there, over this area, we're actually gonna walk there. They had, it's now dormant, but they had a train station that linked directly with the dock, which meant all of the stock that was coming in could literally just be taken from the ships and into the trains and be distributed to anywhere they wanted in the country, which was super, super handy, because that meant that all of the transport cost, all of the distribution costs stayed in-house. Very profitable for them. They created so many jobs. It was the best thing that happened to the city of Southampton. It wouldn't have been possible otherwise. So what type of trade do you think we had here, apart from wool and wine? I can guarantee you by the 19th century, we were trading other things other than wool and wine. We were starting to develop big cargoes with places like Canada, South Africa, Australia. And it used to be mostly supplies for the colonies. We were, shipping a lot of labor as well. A lot of people were going over there. But the big changes really come at the beginning of the 20th century. We have the incident with the Titanic, of which I will be talking more on Wednesday. We managed to somehow recover from that, because it was really, really damaging for the city. And then by the early 20th century, the city of Southampton is literally having 15 million tons of cargo being dropped on this soil every single year. Like, I know those sound like big numbers and you can probably not quantify it, but just 15 million tons of cargo. That's a lot of things. Now, by the mid-20th century, we've diversified our cargo. I'll give you a bit of an insight of what sort of things are coming through and from Southampton. By the 1934, the trade of exotic fruits have actually picked up a lot here in Hampshire and here in the south of England. So we're getting things like mangoes, papayas, pineapples, that sort of thing coming into Southampton on a normal day or a normal week, in this port in the 1930s. They would unload from those cargo ships about 34 tons of pallets just with papayas, pineapples, and mangoes. That's just on fruit. Like, it's crazy when you think about it. It's just mesmerizing how much stuff gets moved through these waters. But that's like I said, you can't have Southampton without the water. It's simply impossible. It is a vital relationship. This is what has allowed the city to carry on. Now, unfortunately, because the city was so prosperous, yes, we are moving now towards the right again, because the city was so prosperous, this became a huge target during the Second World War. And I mean huge target. We had about 226 bombs dropped just in this docking area. All right. That's a lot of bombs, and that's just here. Overall, in the city of Southampton, we had, well, the guesstimate, and I mean guess, because it's difficult to really estimate these things, is that a total of 30,000 bombs were dropped in Southampton during the Luftwaffe raids. And that's just, I mean, projectile bombs. We're not even considering here incendiary missiles. So with those 226 bombs that dropped on the dock itself, they destroyed at least 26 outbuildings. With outbuildings, I mean sheds, warehouses, storage houses, that type of stuff. And there was severe damage to the to some of the terminals as well. Now, the Royal Navy has never been stationed here in Southampton. That's been a job for Portsmouth. That's where the city of Portsmouth has been, to say, key. But during the Second World War, just to try to improve the connections and to have more men ready to cross the channel, Southampton aided in that process. We had actually a huge military camp in the Southampton Common, and a lot of ships were actually stationed here. A lot of our ships were not necessarily troops or transporting troops, but again, more in the supply chain, moving things from the north of the country to the south of the country and over across the channel. But that was a very, very important strategic point, and the docks were a primary target, so they got completely bombed. They got eventually redone in the 1960s with a lot of funding from the government and the local government. And that's actually, little by little, what gave Southampton the opportunity to rebrand itself as a cruise ship capital. Because during the 60s, obviously, the desire to travel, the desire to take these new opportunities and to see the world was very important, particularly after the war. The people who was able to afford it decided to take a boat, just like today you guys are taking this trip with me and go somewhere else. And Southampton capitalized from that. And if it wasn't because of that, we probably wouldn't be the city that we are today. We wouldn't have adapted, we wouldn't have developed, and we wouldn't have been able to move on from all the misery that we suffered. But we did. By the 70s, the city was almost the size that it is in this day and age. And by the 90s, we were already in full resurgence. So the most recent statistics suggest that already well into the 2010s, Southampton was number one ocean liner and cruise ship liner in Europe and in the UK. So it was a pretty good comeback. And that's pretty much the end of the tour. But I wanted to come here just to show you this part of the city wall, because I think it's a good point to connect past and present. This is called Tudor House Tower. This would have been the exterior point or the farther exterior point of the city walls during the Middle Ages. This served as well as storage for the wool trade and the wine trade. In fact, you can't see it, but this is currently a heritage venue. They hold a lot of events in here. And downstairs they have some old wine cellars that sometimes have some wine tasting and historical talks because of this. And just imagine all of this that you're seeing right now would be the view of any guard in Southampton up until the 17th century when this became the prison of the city, and it all would have been water. And overnight, as you know, kind of like by magic, we started developing all of this. All of that are the current docks, or at least this is where it starts. By the way, Southampton has now like 56 docking areas, so I'm not gonna show you all. We could be here watching dock areas until tomorrow. But overnight, that just appeared and created such a profitable enterprise for the city. And that is really the journey of early medieval Southampton up until the 19th century. Just want to give you this last view of Tudor House Tower. I think my gimbal is currently running out of battery, and that's probably why it's giving me a little bit of a hard time. But that's it. That's the end of the tour. So I'm just gonna turn around to say hi. Well, there we go. Thank you so much, guys, for that. I hope it makes sense. I hope it helps you realize how, you know, the journeys of cities and places that we go to aren't necessarily straightforward. I mean, you know, it took this city literally 500 years to get to the state that they were in the Middle Ages, by no fault of their own. But it's sometimes what happens in history. But it can happen. And I really, really wanted to take this opportunity as well, to say thank you for being here. Thank you for your time, and thank you for being so supportive. You know, talking about certain topics in this day and age, like the war, like what happened to Southampton during the Second World War, is very hard, because I keep on thinking of all of my colleagues in Kiev. I've been talking to a few of them, and as you all know, the situation is really, really hard. So thank you for being there for us. Thank you for being there for them. And if you guys can spend some time and, you know, go and support our colleagues in the Ukraine, you would be absolutely amazing, because they really need your help today. You know, I really appreciate your help and the fact that you're here, but, you know, I don't have bombs dropping on me, which is, you know, a matter of life and death. So thank you so much for your kindness, for your words, for your company. And we'll be seeing you very soon. You guys have a lovely weekend. Take care of yourselves and stay safe. Bye.